Hello, good people of YouTube. Welcome to episode 27 of What Makes This Song Special. If you've not seen the show before, what I do is I take a song that takes me back to an event or a time in my life, something important to me or something special to me. I then talk a little bit about the singer of the song and a little bit about the song, the history of the song. And that's it. That's how the episodes work. What makes the song special to you? If it does hit a nerve, remind you of something special in your past, please leave a comment as to why it's a special song to you. I'm going to tell you why it's a special song to me and where I was the first time I heard it. So 1998, round about 1998, I would have been in 5th year at high school, and my mental health wasn't in a good place at that time. I know the last few weeks have been quite funny stories, quite upbeat songs. This week's going to be a wee bit more dark, but I think it's important that we talk about mental health issues, and certainly I suffered on and off over the years with said issues. So 1998, nobody other than probably my closest friends and family knew that I was going through some pretty dark stuff, and I think I hid it quite well to folk in school who kind of just knew me sort of peripherally. I was quite an extrovert by this point. I'd gone from being quite shy and quiet in school to being kind of wanting to be the centre of attention all the time, and being quite loud, and so but inside, behind all that, I was a kind of nervous wreck, really struggling, and I started taking panic attacks. And for anybody who's ever had a panic attack, you kind of live in constant fear of them, and that fear then sort of is what makes you often have another panic attack, which is a kind of horrible vicious circle to get into. It should have been a time of life where everything was carefree and fun, and we're going to parties with friends, and I was becoming a young adult. But the truth was, everything just frightened me. Everything about the future frightened me. On the surface, I was quite popular, I had friends, I was a singer in a band. There were probably folk who thought, I wish I could be that guy. And they would have been wrong, because I was really struggling, behind that exterior. I really was struggling, as much as everything looked great on the outside. I was living with these demons. Everything made me anxious. So the thought of going out, the thought of staying in, the thought of company, the thought of solitude, of performing, of not performing, I'd find a way to become obscenely nervous about everything. And the only time I really felt safe was when me and my brothers would stay in and play FIFA on the PlayStation or watch The Simpsons together. It was kind of these moments where I'd always feel kind of like I could sort of breathe and it's all good for just now, everything's all right. And even a lot of the time when I was doing that, I was still worrying about things, at the back of my mind, feeling anxious. My stomach was chewed up 24/7, and I'd lost quite a lot of weight because I wasn't really eating as much as I had been. And I think what I was eating, I was just burning it off because it was just nervous energy. I had bad obsessive compulsive disorder, and I'd gone to the doctor, and I'd ended up taking some medication that had been prescribed, and which also I think just made me feel more alienated, because I felt like I'd become a sort of statistic, when people say, like X amount of people suffer from anxiety, X amount of people take antidepressants, X amount of people do this, do that. And you can't help but question, why are my friends not feeling like I'm feeling? Why is everybody just enjoying life and not wondering what dark, horrible futures ahead, or what might happen, what if, why me? And why couldn't I just enjoy life without obsessing and overthinking about everything? So I remember one Friday I couldn't face going into computing class. I just wasn't enjoying that class. I just mental health wasn't good, and I decided that I wasn't going in. And I decided, right, well, where will I hide? And instead of getting into the double period of computing, which was a 2-hour period, I sneaked off down to the empty assembly hall, where there was there was a piano that was just lying in the corner of that room, and the lights were off, and I sort of hoped nobody passing by in the corridors would hear me, but I started just playing that piano. I thought I'll just hide in here for a couple of hours, hoping that no teachers come in, and I'll play the piano. And so the ideas for the chords and a melody just sort of poured out, and I started writing these lyrics about my papa, which is what I called my grandpa, who'd passed away a couple of years before this. And I'd never really come to terms with it, and this song was just sort of writing itself. I was writing this song, it's called Where Did You Go? And the lyrics were coming out, and I was writing these kind of strange chords on the piano, or coming up with these strange chords, and I didn't really know what the chords were, because by this point I couldn't even really play piano that well. I'd only been really messing about on the piano for a year or two at this point. Just I knew a few chords, C, F, G, A minor, and I was just blagging it, coming up with these really cool, elaborate chords that I would find out years later were kind of really quite cool, jazzy, tricky chords, but I was just pressing things that sounded nice. And yeah, I think at one point one of the teachers, one of my teachers who'd become a good friend, he was the director of the school show, Mr. Muirhead, he popped his head in and said, "Oh, you'd better get out of here. Miss Gallagher's looking for you," who was my computing teacher. And someone told her you'd be down here playing the piano. So I was caught, so I thought, oh God, right, I want to finish this song. I was in the zone, I was writing the song, the emotion was flooding out, it was making me feel better, I think, just getting some of that emotion out. And I thought, I don't want to go back to computing, I don't want to get into trouble, and I don't want the writing of this potential, worldwide hit that I was writing, to kind of pause for any amount of time. So I quickly ran down to the music department to hide in a cupboard. There was this wee cupboard beside the music department that had a piano in it and some guitars and violin cases and things. Tiny wee cramped space. And I continued writing this song. I thought, nobody will find me in here. And my music teachers in school were just the best. Mrs. T and Mrs. Miller. I remember my computing teacher coming down to look for me at one point, and I heard Mrs. T and Mrs. Miller saying that they hadn't seen me, knowing full well that I was in the cupboard playing piano. So thanks to them for looking out for me and keeping me out of trouble. So I finished this song called Where Did You Go?, which was about my papa, as I mentioned. I'll leave a wee link. I'll leave a link to it. You can listen to it on Spotify, all the good streaming sites, Apple Music, YouTube, all these things. But I'll leave maybe a wee YouTube link to it. It's an old song, as I was only about 16 at the time when I wrote that. So when we finished school that day, I was desperate to record the song. I thought I really want to get this down so I don't forget what I've written and what the melody's like. And it wasn't the days of you just picked your phone up and you could record a version into the sound recorder. You had to try and remember what you'd come up with, melody-wise, chords-wise. So I had to try and remember this the whole way home. And I remember phoning my mate Michael Oakley, who I've mentioned in a few of the episodes, and asked Mike to come round that night. His dad, also Jimmy, is a musician as well, so he had some cool recording stuff. Michael brought round to my house that night a DAT player, a DAT recorder, which isn't even really, that's not even a thing anymore. A mini disc player, which isn't a thing anymore either. But I remember Mike came round to mine, and we started putting the song down, put different parts down, a bass part, some kind of drum samples, on this old pirate version of Cubase that we had to sequence it with all these MIDI parts and some keyboards and some strings. It all sounded really cool. And we then bounced the track back and forward from minidisc to DAT and then put the vocals on top. So it's a very, very primitive way of recording compared to what you can do now, or what you could even do just a couple of years after that. But what we had to do at that point was find a way of recording by bouncing overdubs essentially from one machine to another, and you lose a wee bit of quality each time. But it was a demo, and it sounded really cool. We'd added some guitar, some vocals. I think I don't know if we were finished the song or almost finished, but it was, we just needed a kind of a break from it, as you often do. For anyone who's ever recorded anything before, you sometimes get a bit jaded, and your ears just need a rest. So we went out for a walk And I remember it was like autumn or winter because it was dark and cold. And I started telling Mike about how I'd been feeling. Mike had left school at this point, so I wasn't seeing as much of him. And he hadn't really I don't think I'd really explained to him where I was at kind of emotionally and stuff. And I remember we'd been best pals since primary school, so it was easy to chat to him about these things. And yes, I've opened up, but the conversation didn't really make me feel any better. I thought if I kind of opened up and spoke about it, I would feel better. But I think the relief didn't really materialise. And I think when it didn't materialise, things just kept getting darker and darker. And for some reason on that walk, usually walking made me feel better, but on that walk, something just took a turn for the worst. And I remember I can pinpoint the exact moment that I sort of experienced depression for the first time. It was a completely different feeling to anything that I'd ever experienced in my life up to that point. It wasn't what I thought depression would feel like. I think it made me realise that a lot of time when people, including me, said they were depressed, often they're fed up, bored, frustrated. But when you're depressed, there's a whole kind of... It's such a hard thing to put into words. And I'd used that word before, not realising the magnitude of the actual condition, the feeling that comes with it. It wasn't sadness or anguish or frustration or apathy. It was like a darkness came over my outlook of my entire future, and everything was just really terrifying. It was a horrible, horrible moment. I feel it was like a feeling like that nothing could ever make you happy again. It just entered, and then there was no getting away from it. It was a feeling that I had no future. I remember the exact moment that I felt it, and I remember thinking, oh my God, I need away from this black cloud. How can I escape this? It was like, yeah, a horrible feeling that I'll never forget. And unfortunately, I think it's one of those things that, you know, once you've been there once, it's the kind of thing that unfortunately returns. But fortunately, I got over the worst of it, and I think that level of depression has really only come over me a few times over the years, for relatively short periods of time, thankfully. I've always been able to sort of feel it creeping up and then make real efforts to make myself really, really busy and sort of run away from it, preoccupied with other things. I don't know if that's really a good way of coping with these things, but that's how I've always tried to cope with it. I think that level, for me, everybody's different. For me, that level of depression has only really entered when I've had a really long period of anxiety, where I've not managed to pull myself away from that anxious, fearful outlook on life, and eventually it kind of, like a blanket, it just sort of covers you, and by that point it's pretty hard to get back out. So I've always, when I feel it approaching, managed to kind of pull myself away from it, and hopefully always will. But the mental health mission has been a long on and off road for me over the years, and it's something that I'm quite open about talking about because I think it's important. I think for a long time I tried to hide that from a lot of people, and I think once I started to open up about those things and speak about it, it gave it a normality. It gave it a sort of, it took away the stigma attached to it, and I think now people are starting to open up a bit more about mental health issues and stuff, which is really, really important. So I think, getting back to the story, I think we managed to make it home. I don't actually remember much after that moment. I just remember being completely encompassed by this feeling that I did not like, and yeah, it was a terrifying feeling. Anyway, I remember getting home and trying to preoccupy myself with the conversation with Mike and the song, and just trying not to think about that feeling that I'd had, and which was very much still there. And we got back, and I think Mike said something like, "Oh, well, I really want to let you hear this song, or I want to let you hear how good the quality of DAT is." DAT, that was like this, I don't know, digital analog tape or something, or digital, I don't know. But it was this really high quality, and he was like, it's even better than CD, you've got to hear this. And he stuck on Walking on the Milky Way by OMD. And I felt this pain, like, of anxiety, like a pain of anxiety. Sounds like a strange thing to say, but it was this horrible pain and this anxiety in the pit of my stomach, and I wanted to cry when I heard the song, but I didn't care about anything enough. There was complete apathy. I just didn't care about anything enough to cry, if that makes any sense. It was just a strange, horrible moment again, and as I listened to the song, I felt scared about everything. The song has this euphoric sadness to it, with this incredible production, which just made me feel frightened. I don't know why. It seemed to accentuate all of the emotions that I was already feeling. And I remember thinking that the song was amazing, but also that I never wanted to hear it ever again, which is such a strange thing to say, because it was an impressive song, but I was just, I don't know, it seemed to remind me of that immediate moment right there. And yeah, the lyrics even spoke to me when I was only 17. My head was full of brilliant dreams, is how the lyrics in the song start, and I was, I think, 16 or 17. And yeah, it just felt very much like the song was saying, you're going to suffer, and you might make some amazing memories, and that's the journey, you know, and you're going to have to just deal with it. And I didn't want to deal with it. I didn't want to hear it. And yet, when I hear that song now, I feel so happy. It makes me think about how far I've come, how you can persevere in life through, I think, almost anything. You see how much strength people have. And yeah, I have such a massive empathy for people who have to deal with mental health issues on a daily basis. As I said, I've been plagued by it on and off in my life, and I've had some, you know, great periods of time where I've been kind of free from it, and you know and there are some people who just live with it 24/7, day after day, which must be absolutely horrific, you know. So yeah, it's not fun, and I think it's taken most of my life so far to kind of understand that journey, and I'm kind of okay with it now. I understand it on a sort of deeper level. I think I've made peace with it. I wish I could go back and tell my 16 or 17-year-old self that everything was going to be okay. The reality is that we'll all feel that type of fear, anxiety, maybe depression at points in our life, and I think that almost makes it comforting, not in the way that you want everyone to suffer, because of course you don't want anybody to suffer, but it does feel reassuring that you're not alone. And I think that's the biggest fear I had, was that I was somehow broken, and you know, I was just this, you know, freak that, you know, I just, why me? Why do I feel like this? Why am I not happy? And everything else in my life was going great, and why could I not just enjoy it? So to anyone watching who's suffering, talk to people, talk to friends, talk to family. Don't suffer in silence. It's the worst thing you can do. Try to find some positive from it. For me, it was always, I remember telling myself that as a songwriter, I kind of needed a bit of that pain, you know, that the poet needs the pain sort of thing, and that this suffering would make me a great songwriter, that I'd learn from it and become a better person because of it. I used to tell myself that, and I think hopefully that's true. So there's my wee story, bit of a dark story this week. Apologies. You can't have happy stories every week. Last few weeks have been kind of funny stories. This week, I wanted to tell this story. I wanted to sing this song, and I think it's an important message. And as I say, hopefully to anybody who's listening who's feeling like that, reach out, talk to somebody, leave a comment, send me a private message if you want. We can chat about it. But that's what it reminds me of when I hear the song. I remember that night, how horribly dark everything felt in life, and how that song sounded for the first time, and how it now makes me feel when I hear that song, because I feel like I've accomplished something when I hear that song. It's like, it's not a sad song anymore. It still has a nostalgia attached to it for me when I hear it, but it sort of makes me feel strong, makes me want to, you know, puff out my chest. So I'll talk a bit about the band. Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark, OMD for short, are an English electronic band. They were formed in Wirral, which is in Merseyside, kind of near Liverpool, in 1978. Famous for many big hits in the 80s, and early 90s, the biggest one probably being a track called Enola Gay, which was an anti-war song, and also the name of the aircraft that dropped the first ever atomic bomb on Hiroshima in August 1945. A very famous song, powerful track. Give it a listen if you haven't heard it before. You'll instantly recognise the wee synth riff because it's been used in a million things over the years, but it's a great track. Walking in the Milky Way was released in August 1996 and appeared on the Universal album. The song reached number 17 in the UK singles chart, which really disappointed the band, as they'd thought they'd written potentially their best ever hit or best ever song, which I would 100% agree with. I think it's by far their best song, in my opinion. I think it's an amazing track. In an interview a few years back, the singer of the band, Andy McCluskey, said that he had sweated blood over writing Walking in the Milky Way, which he thought was as good a song as he'd ever written or ever would write. But BBC Radio 1 wouldn't play it, and as a result, they felt it wasn't trendy enough by that point. Maybe it wasn't trendy enough because there was different types of music. I suppose the 90s was the kind of advent of the boy band and the girl band and all that stuff. So they wouldn't play it in Radio 1. Because Radio 1 wouldn't play it, Woolworths and some other shops wouldn't stock it. Just shows you the kind of horrible way that the music industry works. And the upshot of it was that one of the best songs he'd ever written struggled to get to number 17 in the UK charts, leading to him saying that he wasn't going to bang his head against the brick wall anymore, and he quit. And that was the end of the band. I know they've done some gigs and things more recently, and I don't know if they've released any albums or anything like that in recent years, but certainly that was the end of an era for them. It was the end of the band. And he actually abandoned OMD and instead formed and wrote songs for Liverpool girl group Atomic Kitten alongside OMD drummer Stuart Kershaw. Now, a cool wee fun fact about Andy McCluskey is that he's actually right-handed, but originally learned to play bass guitar on a left-handed guitar, and as a result plays with the strings upside down. So he's a singer in the band and the bass player, but plays with the strings strung upside down. Pointless information, but a wee extra side fact. So his voice, we'll talk about Andy McCluskey's voice. His voice, an interesting voice, quite theatrical. He makes a lot of strange little noises, like grunts and sort of squeals and stuff like that. That type of singing can sound a little bit silly on certain songs. I don't always love that, but he doesn't overdo it, and it seems to be more prevalent on certain songs as opposed to throughout the entire back catalogue of their songs. So I think some of that probably suits the era and kind of more some of the kind of fun pop songs, and from that style that he was coming from, I think he's kind of forgiven for that, for the style of music. Technically, I think technically he's a really good singer. Not a lot of really shouty, loud vocals from what I've heard, and maybe that's because he never had to get high into his chest register. He manages really high notes with relatively low volume, which is pretty tricky to do unless you're technically sound. Excuse the pun. Technically a good singer, I think. I've never been a huge fan of OMD as a band outside of today's wonderful song. So I'd be lying if I had said that I've heard every single vocal capability of Andy McCluskey's that he's got up his sleeve. But from what I've heard, he's got really good range, tone, and ability to stay in tune, which I would say are the first three main objectives of any vocalist, those three things. So, and in judging from a couple of live performances that I watched on YouTube in sort of preparation for today's episode, his voice still sounds really good. It stood the test of time, and I think that says a lot about his technique, because it's often the poor technique that ends up when you hear a singer on YouTube when they've turned 60 or beyond and their voice is just completely gone. His voice still sounds pretty much the same, if not a wee bit better, actually. I think maybe even better than it did on the original live recordings that I heard. A wee bit richer and loads of control, and definitely still able to hold all of his notes and hit kind of higher ranges or higher pitches in his range. So well done, Andy, for that. That's today's episode. I know it's a wee bit of a dark one, but I wanted to talk about the song. It's an amazing song. I hope you press the button here for part 2 to hear my cover version of it. I'm going to do a wee piano version of it, but also have a listen to the original, because the original's like this huge kind of orchestra and stuff going on. It's amazing. It's an amazing song. That's it for today. I promise I'll try and make next week's a wee bit more upbeat, but I thought it was important we talked about those things today. And thank you, as always, for watching. Leave a comment, hit subscribe, hit like. There's a lot of things to do. Jump on and follow me on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all of the above, and I'll see you next week. Thank you.